We are joined on this episode by a writer and editor that many horror journalists know and love, myself included. You might have seen her sharp eye in Rue Morgue or Shudder's weekly newsletter, The Bite. Now she's currently the managing editor for Fangoria and the evening news editor for Slash Film. She is Ariel Fisher. Ariel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for giving me such a lovely intro.
Aw, well, your work speaks for itself, so it was really easy to write. But thank you. You're someone I've wanted to have on for a while now because I'm just in awe at all the things that you do. So again, Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Ariel, the way we usually start off here before we kind of jump into the weeds with all the stuff we mentioned and more, we usually ask the guest, how did they first get the bug for film? So with you, did you grow up in a household that kind of appreciated movies, music, art, the arts, or genre even?
I did, yeah, which is interesting because none of my parents and step-parents are in the arts in any way, shape, or form. My entire family... My parents split when I was like 7, so I had step-parents relatively young. All of them are in medicine. So like my dad's a pediatric biochemist. My mom is a retired microbiologist and infection control practitioner. My stepdad, a retired orthopedic surgeon, and my stepmom, a retired nurse. So when myself and my older brother, Derek, decided to kind of focus on writing, we kind of became the black sheep of the family in a really weird way, which, everybody was so disappointed. Oh, no, they're not going to go into this field. But our parents still loved, our mom and dad still loved film. And it's because of them that I can honestly say I do not remember the first movie I ever saw. I know for a fact that it was Home Alone because my parents told me. They took me to see it in the theater. I think I was 2 years old, maybe. And I cried every single time Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci were on screen because they scared me. and that's the memory I have of that, which is really the memory is to say that remembering that I was told that. But I guess one of the earliest memories I have of film was that my brother always got to watch the scary movies because he's 4 years older than me way before I did. So he would be watching Jaws with my mom or my dad in rotation in the living room. And my parents would swap out to keep me occupied in a different room so that they'd do a puzzle with me or something, or we'd do arts and crafts. So I would listen to Jaws. I heard Quint get eaten by Bruce before I saw it. And then Jaws would go on to become one of my absolute all-time favorite movies to the point where it's now a comfort film for me. I'll put it on if I want to, if I want something comforting while I go to sleep, which is, I debate how perverse that is, but to each their own. And my dad was a photographer when he was in university. He always studied science, but his passion was photography and exploration. He wanted to go to, for his 60th birthday, he was actually going to climb to base camp out Mount Everest and do a trek up there. So he's always kind of had that sort of free spirit, but very neurotic mentality, which I think is where I get that from. And my mom initially wanted to be an architect, and she paints in her spare time and all sorts of stuff. So they were always in the sciences, but their hearts lay elsewhere. So, we'd listen to music all the time. My parents had a great record collection when I was growing up, and we'd always have something on. I'm starting to inherit it slowly as my dad is willing to let go of it. But, yeah. So, and since then, we've always just kind of nurtured that in each other, my brother and myself especially.
So between him watching the Jaws and other scary movies, is that kind of what got you down the horror pipeline? Is it what opened up the world to you, kind of staying in the lane of genre?
I think sort of. A lot of my decisions around getting into writing and getting into film in general actually stem from my brother, mostly because I just wanted to be like him. And I admired him, and I do still admire him, and I love him very much. But he had a way of showing me, has a way, I should say. It sounds like he's gone. He's here. He has a way of showing me things about horror that I never really thought about. And at the time when I was young, it was that I was jealous that I didn't get to watch the things that he did. And I wanted to do what he did because he was cool. So if I did those things, I would be cool too. And so that's how I saw Interview with the Vampire for the first time, was because he had it on VHS and I kind of snagged it one night and watched it without him paying attention. I saw Natural Born Killers when I was 7 years old because we used to borrow our grandparents' pay-per-view box when they went to Florida for the winter. And he watched it in pieces when our parents were out of the house and didn't think twice about, keeping the 7-year-old away. So I wound up seeing stuff. Oh, yeah. Formative. Very formative. So that was a lot of how horror came about. And simultaneously, that's a lot of how writing came about. Because my brother was always... he always wrote. He doodled on things. And when we were in high school, he started writing for these short fiction competitions at our high school. And the prize was to get published. And I used to say no, I can't do that. I can't do that. Derek's the writer, not me. I can't do those things. And then I would just... One year, I think I talked myself into it and I entered with some very maudlin poetry and I placed third and I got published. And it was a whole big to-do where I was like, oh, holy shit, I can actually do this. So that weirded me out like crazy. And then it would take another several years until I was in university for anyone. I started kind of my own blog and things and all of that. But then when I was in university and I wanted to write for the McMaster Silhouettes art magazine called Andy at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. And I kept talking myself out of it. And then my guidance counselor was like, okay, enough of this. You're going to leave us. You're going to leave me here and you're going to go straight to their office. You're going to give them your email and you're going to ask to be a volunteer writer for them. And the worst thing that can happen is that they say no. Lo and behold, they did not say no. And I got the bug and I haven't stopped since.
That's awesome. You kind of predicted my next question, which was going to be what was your first actual job in the industry, whether or not it was paid or unpaid? But it's so awesome that you just took the leap. And like you said, the worst thing they can do is say no, right? So I'm glad that you did that and it set you on the path. I suppose then what was your next, that was more of a volunteer position, right?
Yeah.
So what was your first actual paycheck from, as a writer?
My first paycheck was actually from Rue Morgue, which if to any listeners who aren't familiar is, I guess basically Canada's answer to Fangoria. And it's an amazing team. And the current executive editor is outstanding, Andrea Subasati. And she has this remarkable podcast with Alexandra West, Faculty of Horror, that if you're not familiar with, you should check out because it's well worth your time and your energy. But it was when they were under the previous editor, Dave Alexander, and I wrote a big piece on Here Comes the Devil by Adrian Garcia Bogliano. I did a big piece on that film that wound up running as the front page piece. It actually wound up being the insert in the feature, which for a first paid gig isn't bad. I had done other stuff by that point, the whole, you'll get exposure for nothing. But I had already been writing for several different websites, one in New York, one in the UK, one or two in Toronto at that point. And then I finally got my paid gig with Rue Morgue.
And that's an awesome first pay gig. I bet. Did you take a picture with the magazine and everything? I totally would have done that.
I think I did. I'm pretty sure I must still have the magazine somewhere, but it's probably in storage in Toronto where the rest of my stuff is right now.
Oh. So tell us about your progression from a writer to an editor. And I think it'd be great too, if you could explain kind of what an editor, both for print and digital, actually does. Because I think a lot of people don't really know.
No, they it's a very thankless job a lot of the time that a lot of people don't understand. I'd imagine, movie editors, it's the same, video editors, it's the same kind of situation. If they do their job right, you don't see the person behind the edits. So it just kind of goes, oh, wow, this filmmaker did a great job. And that's it. But I started getting into editing. I'm trying to remember how long ago it was, and time is a construct, so I don't know. But it was for a website called Sound on Sight that is now Pop Optic, and it was Justine Smith from Montreal, who is a very good friend of mine now. She brought me, like I had written for them for a little bit, and she just asked, how would I feel about being an assistant editor for the site? Nobody got paid. It was a completely unpaid job, but that was my first editing job officially. And I was the assistant editor. And so my job was to kind of go through all of the pieces that came in and, give them a very quick once over. Sometimes I'd be the only one looking at them, and my job was just to kind of assist in the workload. And other times it was for me to go through, make sure all the grammar and punctuation was correct, and then hand it off to the editor so that they could give it a once over to decide everything before going forward. It was interesting, mostly because it was my first time as an editor and I was still very young. I want to say I was in my mid-20s, and trying to correct older men's writing who have been doing this longer than you, even if you're right, is a process and a struggle. I got a lot of pushback. It was not fun.
Sounds rough.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if we're being totally honest, there are a lot of aspects of being a woman in this industry that are, as Becky, I'm sure you well know, on both sides, like in front of and behind the camera and writing about what the camera does. It's all very complex and complicated and sometimes a little painful, but we love it. So we do it anyways. And after that, I didn't do too much editing work for a while. It actually kind of shook me a bit. And then I wound up editing for Shudder's weekly newsletter, The Bite. And I did that for the past two years or so. And that transformed into, well, not transformed, it led to other opportunities like now with Slash Film and Fangoria. And in terms of duties versus print versus web is a lot faster generally. It also depends on whether or not, like with something like The Bite, I could take, so long as I had designated the right amount of time, I could take my time with a piece, go over it a few times and send it back if I had the time to the writer and say, like these sections need to be completely rewritten. And sometimes I'd be able to give constructive feedback, and it sounds really restrained. You're not really opening up yourself. It feels like you're hiding something as opposed to just writing. So try and take a deep breath and do what Stephen King says, write with the door closed, as if no one's ever going to see it. And then give me that, and we can edit that. But it needs to be more honest. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't realize about writing, is that even if you're writing about film and you're not writing your magnum opus or your biography or something, it's still a vulnerable process. And you're still sharing a part of yourself, even if it's just an opinion. And so many writers, myself included, get way too caught up in their heads with some kind of, I don't know if I'm sounding right, or I don't know if I'm communicating correctly. And I feel like this is what people are going to want to hear as opposed to what I want to say. And a big part of my job in print and online is largely just to get people to kind of relax out of that. Because once they let go of that pretense that they're supposed to be or do a certain thing in a certain way, you see the writer come through, and that's where the good work is. In like with the evening news editor stuff at Slash Film, on the other hand, because a lot of it is news, there really isn't that much time to do that. Everything goes fairly quickly. Like our writers turn things in within an hour, and I get it edited as quickly as I can, sometimes in 5 minutes, sometimes in 15 or 20. And then it gets published. And that depends on the night, and it depends on the news. So if we get something that's breaking, a writer has to turn it around in 20 minutes. And then I have to edit it and put it up in 5. So it's all, and that includes formatting and images and this, that, and the other. So there's a lot of moving parts that people don't see. And in that, at a news desk, it's very, very fast and stressful, but also really exhilarating. Like it's very, very fun. In print, it's a longer process, particularly because with Fangoria, they're quarterly, right? So you have more time, theoretically, depending on when writers get you their work. There is a finite amount of time, because you can't push back publishing, because then you miss your window and it's a whole nightmare. But if your writers get you their work in time and there are things that you need them to correct, like that voice, for example, like I was saying, getting the writer to kind of loosen up. Sometimes you have the ability to do that, and sometimes you don't. And sometimes pieces get scrapped as a result if they need too much work and there just isn't enough time between when they receive it and when it needs to go to print. then either there's nothing we can do about it and we have to sub in something else on the fly, or we have to make it the best version of itself ourselves. And no one ever sees that, right? Because it's credited to the writer, which as it should be. But that's all part of the complicated moving parts of this job, which is that, I guess the way Jacob Hall, my boss at Slash Film, put it to me was, your job, or I think he said this to the team actually on behalf of me and Hoi-Chan Bui, who's another editor at the site, was their job is to make you guys look good. That's all we're here to do. So that kind of sums it up, is we're on the back end trying to make sure that writers in any medium sound and read as best as they possibly can.
And you do a good job of it on both.
Thank you.
Would you say, based on what you said about it being exhilarating while a lot of work, do you kind of prefer the role of editor now? I know you don't not write anymore. You still write columns and such, which we'll get to. But like, do you find that balance just right now, or do you prefer being an editor more than a writer at the moment?
I think it's hard to say, because there's a part of my brain that's like, well, no, you have to still say that you absolutely love writing because that's how you got into this, and don't betray your first love. But that's not like, I love writing. I absolutely love writing. I don't think I could ever do anything other than what I do. It's just one of those things where, could you do something else with your life? No, I don't think so. I think this is what I was meant to do, and that's it. But I think editing writing brought me into a world that I love, and editing helped me find my home within that world. I really love what I do. I really, really do. And I try as hard as I can to be the best at it that I can be, because I admire the people who do it. And I admire the people who have done it for me for many years, and the people who have shown me the ropes and helped me learn. And it's just such a beautiful part of the process of creating something. And it's honestly a privilege, I find, to be a part of that part of the process. I do still love writing, though. And so they're both I kind of don't know if one could exist without the other anymore.
Right. And I guess on that note, with both aspects of it, is there a particular piece or even a series of pieces maybe that you are super proud of, be it as a writer or an editor?
Oh, that is a very good question. My memory sucks. So there was one piece that I wrote that I was really, really proud of many years ago. And I think if I were to go back and read it now, I'd be like, oh no, you were so green. But I remember being very proud of it at the time. And I wrote it for a website that no longer is, called Row 3, which was my home for a long time. And they really just gave me free rein to write whatever the hell I wanted, which was great. It was about a retrospective on the Coen brothers that was playing at TIFF Bell Lightbox. And I specifically wrote about A Serious Man, which is probably my favorite Coen brothers film. And it's this perfect analysis of Jewish identity and Jewishness and Jewish humor and Jewish sorrow and grief. And it doesn't tie in with the Holocaust, which is so relieving, because there's more to us than just, our trauma. Although, let's face it, we're Jews. A lot of it is our trauma, just not necessarily from the war. So I loved that movie so much, and getting to write about it was really lovely. And I was really proud of what I produced. There's a lot of other stuff. I'm still incredibly proud of the piece that I wrote for Slash Film on Slumber Party Massacre 2, because so go forth and read it, folks. You should find that. But I wrote it during Pride Month a couple years ago, I want to say. And I basically said that Slumber Party Massacre 2 is about the main character's repressed bisexuality and how it manifests in a violent way when she keeps trying to hide and subdue it, and it just breaks out of her like a fury. And I'm still super proud of that, particularly because it's been referenced by Joe Bob Briggs on The Last Drive-In, and I want to say his name's Dead Meat James, about okay, this seems far-fetched, but sure. So I'm like, yes, I'm doing it right. The other good one that I did that was similar, that pissed off a lot of people, that I was very proud about, was actually a similar column presenting Mission Impossible 2. Was that the one by John Woo?
Yes.
Yeah, presenting Mission Impossible 2 as a queer-coded, vaguely homophobic film, not intentionally, but in execution. That was when people started telling me I was nuts and needed psychiatric help. And I mean, I did, but not because of that. that was just for an anxiety disorder. But in terms of editing, there are a lot of pieces I'm very proud of having edited. That like too many to pick at specifically, but there is one in particular that my brain always comes back to, and it's Alexis Briscuzo, or she goes by Lex Briscuzo. She wrote about the Blair Witch Project, and she had pitched me on it, and I think it was she was relatively new to pitching. She had been writing for a long time for different publications, but hadn't really pitched freelance stuff before, or had been trying to and hadn't been accepted. And so she pitched how, the anniversary is coming up and I'd like to write about why it's so relevant to found footage. And I was like, okay, I've heard this before. I've read this piece, and we've all read that piece. They've published that piece like 3 times a year since the film was released. So I'm going to ask you to come back with a different idea connected to it. Why do you care about it? Why does it matter to you? And why do you want to write about it, really? Not why do you think people want to read about it? Why do you want to talk about it? And then she came back with this pitch about how Heather in the film kind of serves as a stand-in for, or an allegory for, women filmmakers in horror, and how they are usually burdened with coming up with all of the solutions, thinking of all of the details, making sure everything goes off without a single hitch. And if just one thing goes wrong, everything falls on their shoulders, and they're to blame for everything and held to a higher standard, all of these things. And I was like, yes, that's the piece. Go for it. And she wrote it and everything, and she submitted it. And it was still written from the vantage point of what will people want to hear? And in a very formulaic way. And I'm like, okay, let's try this again, because you've come this far and you're doing really well, but it sounds like you're telling me what you think people want to hear. I don't care about that. Tell me what you want to write. Like, let your personality shine through, because that's what people are going to tune into, right? They're not interested in, people are less interested in what you write than they are in how you write it. So bring yourself forward. And then she came back, and this second draft was it. Like, I had minor things to fix, the usual, like some grammatical things here and there, punctuation here and there, but that was it. She nailed it. And I was so proud of her. And I still am to this day, for how much work she put into that, and how well she turned it around, and just how well she took instruction and recognized that it was constructive and that it was supposed to help her, because it did. And she did great work as a result.
I feel like that story is just such a perfect illustration of the role of an editor and how powerful it can be. And we'll link to those articles you mentioned from Slash Film and the piece on The Bite from Lex as well in the show notes, so that people can go check them out. Speaking of The Bite, I did want to talk a little more about it, which,
Sure.
For those not familiar, Shudder's like a weekly newsletter, essentially. And it seemed like when it started, it was kind of like a small little thing for like the staff to make film recommendations and things like that. But then it feels like it just expanded into this collaboration with so many writers and filmmakers and artists all in the world of horror. You talked a little bit about, transitioning to get the gig as an editor. I'm kind of curious more, how did that actually come about? Did you apply for the role? Did someone come to you and say, hey, we love your work, join the team?
It was that is one of the many reasons I will forever be, I say indebted to, with air quotes, but this is not a visual medium, so I need to say I'm using air quotes, indebted to Phil Noble Jr., who is the editor-in-chief of Fangoria. He's responsible for a few different really excellent things in my life, including sending me on an assignment where I would wind up meeting my now husband. So but one of the other things that he is responsible for is helping me get that job with Shudder. Sean Redlitz had come to him, who works for Shudder. He's like the main public face guy. He's amazing, and I love him to death. He was looking for someone to replace the current person at the time who was doing The Bite, because they wanted to go off and do their own writing. They wanted to focus on their book. And they just couldn't do both. And they were talking, and I guess Phil, I think he did what he normally does, which is ask very subtle questions that aren't really that subtle about, have you ever had any interest in like doing this? Or are these the places that you're working for right now? Or what are you doing with these things? So it's like, okay, I know you're trying to get some information, but for what purpose, Phil? And he recommended me for the job. And I submitted my resume, and I interviewed with Sean and with Craig Engler, who is the general manager of Shudder. And we had, I think, 2 interviews actually. And then I got the job, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I trained and everything, and I got everything off the ground. And then I started finding pieces and finding different writers. And that was always the goal, was to have as many different people as possible and try not to come back to, the same 5 voices, which is hard because there are a handful of people who I really love working with because they turn in solid work every time and they're dependable. And you have to just go out and beyond to not only like even just outside of journalism, like find authors to write for you, and actors or actresses, and film editors or filmmakers, photographers, artists like Melissa Kay, who does the beautiful book nooks, and she wrote about finding creativity during the pandemic and that struggle and how that is a beautiful process. So just that's how it came about and where it wound up going.
Were you given a bit of freedom as far as like coming up with the weekly themes for the bite?
Yeah. I was given a lot of freedom. At first I needed a lot of kind of hand-holding. So I would have meetings with Craig and Sean to run over kind of ideas for the coming month. And then they just trusted me, and I was able to do more or less kind of whatever I wanted within the parameters that I was now aware of. So there was a lot of creative freedom there, even to the point where at first when I started, the pieces were closer to about 400 words. And when I finished, they were anywhere between 500 and 650. So they just kept getting longer because it necessitated the topics that people wanted to write about could still be done in a short format, but they needed slightly more room in order to breathe and not feel rushed or not be relegated to, a listicle or something still interesting. So, yeah.
Right. And you mentioned the challenge of finding different voices because you could always fall back on the same few that you knew and trusted. But was it also a challenge to kind of find the, fresh content ideas, especially when the audience is full of diehard horror fans and some of them have very stringent thoughts on what horror is and isn't? Yeah,
that was the biggest challenge because the majority... I got pitches from people kind of infrequently. Sometimes they were excellent pitches and I'd immediately be like, yep, okay, I'm going to pencil this in for this month and we'll do this in February of this year because it'll coincide with XYZ anniversary. But there were also a lot of pitches that I couldn't use, a lot of ones where they just kind of sided on a profoundly negative take for no particular reason that we don't really subscribe, that I never subscribe to, but also that Shudder as a whole doesn't. They tend to go for the more positive spin on things as opposed to this is why these things suck. It's like, this is why this is incredible. But also, so most of the stories most of the editorials that we published were from ideas that I had to come up with every week. And I would try and think of who would be the best person to write about that and bring that to life. One of the great pitches that I got, actually, I can't believe I didn't mention her earlier, Leah Anderson, who now has a column based on this in Fangoria or on Fangoria.com. The Ontology of Open Mouths was a piece that she wrote for me. And it was from the moment she pitched it, it was absolutely extraordinary. And I had to include it in the discussion of the symbolism of open mouths in horror movies as act of release and act of consumption, and sometimes consumption of the characters, or even just a release of a violent act, things like that. And it was absolutely outstanding. She basically wrote an accessible academic piece And she wrote 2 versions of it, one of which I could include as a bigger bite to go long on the site, and another one that was formatted perfectly for the bite proper. So it was one of the longer bites, but it fit. So like things like that, I'd never in a million years be able to think of. But if you're going to come to me with an idea that is that incredible, I'm not going to pass it up. Not a chance. And a lot of the other times I'd come to a writer with, I think you're the perfect person to tackle this subject. I want you to write about blah. And more often than not, I get the question back of, okay, what do you want me to write about it? And I'm like, let's hammer that out together. Because I don't want to just dump you with my idea. Like 9 times out of 10, I would go to a writer and say, I would like you to write about this, but I would like to hear your thoughts on how to approach it. And we can go from there. Because it's, they're involved in the writing process. They shouldn't just be handed. If you hand someone something generic and just say, make this, they're not going to necessarily make the best thing. They're not going to necessarily do the best work. So giving them the freedom to say, ooh, what if I approached it from this vantage point? Then you're going to get something interesting. That's when you're going to get something unique. And that's always what I was trying to do with it as much as possible, is just bring out that thing in that writer about a topic they may not have thought to write about in a way that only they could write about.
Well, and I think that certainly comes through in like the hundreds of entries of the bite. It must have been hard to say goodbye to the bite, but congratulations on your new roles at Fangoria and /Film. I know you had written for Fangoria before, but what was it like stepping into the managing editor role for such a massive, long-standing name in horror? Like, is there a lot of pressure that you're feeling to carry kind of the torch, or do you feel like you have an opportunity to mix things up?
What are your rules on swearing?
None.
Oh, cool. It was fucking terrifying. It was absolutely fucking terrifying. A lot of disbelief. At first, it all happened very, very quickly because there were like transitions happening and everything. And there's a lot of, Meredith does such absolutely incredible work everywhere she goes. So the idea of taking over for her, because it's not even like, I don't even feel comfortable saying the idea of replacing her. I'm not replacing her. No one can replace Meredith Borders in anything. She is who she is, and she is exceptional and magnificent at what she does. But to step into her position in her stead, shall I say, is really intimidating. Because I think I know I'm good at what I do, but the title comes with so much weight and legacy, and the position has so much responsibility. It's a lot to wrap your head around for many different reasons. And chief among them is that if you had told me a year ago I'd be in this position, I'd have laughed in your face. But if you had told me like 5 or 6 years ago that I'd get to this point, I would have thought you were clinically insane. Not because of me or my abilities or anything, so much as because of the environment that made me feel like I didn't deserve to be a part of this, or that I wasn't capable enough, or that I only got ahead because of certain physical characteristics and traits. It's really hard to wrap your head around getting this kind of position when you've spent a lot of your career being told you're not enough, or you only get these things because of, you're pretty, and that's it.
Yeah, the imposter syndrome there is real. And you're right. Like this, all industries, I was going to say this industry, but I'm like, you know what? It's all industries. Each one faces their own unique challenges, but you're right. Like there have historically been places that have not been welcoming to women, or if you're there, it's only because you're pretty or you're young and attractive. So I can totally understand how that would add to the overall feeling of like not belonging. But one of the interesting things about Fango recently is they're putting so much emphasis on inclusivity and like really broadening, the voices that are, coming out of Fango from an editorial perspective, but also just like kind of changing people's preconceived notions about the fandom. I think that a lot of people have thought about horror fans as, the white males. And I think Fangoria has done a great job of really trying to push against that. And I think that kind of ties into now, like, hopefully it can feel like a more inclusive home for you in that sense. How do you see Fango kind of continuing to impact the genre in that way and continuing to evolve? And like, maybe you have a role in that too, as managing editor.
Oh, Christ, even that's a fucking terrifying concept. But but I mean, I work for them now, so it's gonna, if I wasn't making some kind of an impact, I don't think I'd be doing my job. So put the neuroses aside on that thought, Ariel. But I think since the magazine has been under Phil's care, he has done absolutely, Phil and Meredith, that they have done absolutely everything in their power to make it the best version of it that it could be. And now, especially with their current owners, they are given so much more free rein to appeal to the people who have often been left out of the industry in various different factions. I mean, if you consider the fact that they're two of their newest hires are, you've got me as their managing editor now, who is a queer Jewish woman, and the editor of the website is a queer Latina woman. Like that's, you've already right there got all this new stuff, and we're bringing our own vantage points to it, even just in meetings and when we're having discussions and everything and hashing things out. Angel and I are able to bring different perspectives just to our meetings that then influence how we discuss or approach certain subjects and certain pieces or ideas or things like that. We're also able to, recommend different writers that maybe they might not think of, just even by virtue of being the people that we are who know the people that we know. Because it's, that was the hardest part for me with The Bite, was trying to find new writers, because eventually you're kind of shooting in the dark because you don't know everybody, despite what, the mysteries of the industry may present themselves to be. You don't know every single person in the industry. We're not all totally connected. And you can't just ask people to do things for you at will. Like there's a lot of push and pull there and finding things out. So, there are people that I know that Angel doesn't. There are people that Angel knows that Phil doesn't, and vice versa, and all around that table. So we can recommend different voices to start including. And that's how you diversify things, is by just opening the door and putting more chairs at the table. And Phil has always tried to do that. Always. From day one. That has just been his MO, because he knows that people don't really need to hear from old white guys anymore. They need to hear from the rest of us. And that has been his goal the whole time. And it will be his goal until the day he retires.
And his inbox suffers for it regularly. And as he posts them online often.
Exactly.
It's always the same note too. It's like, I don't know why y'all can't just keep politics out of my horror.
Exactly.
Because anything I don't agree with is politics and or woke. So,
Yeah.
And I'm speaking on behalf of because I happen to look like some of these angry white dudes. So. it's always the same guy who got zero subtext out of horror all his life and then didn't realize it's always been political. But anyway, no, he's doing great work. All of you are. And we talked about this before, like Fangoria's legacy cannot be understated in the horror community, because and it's a testament to how much it's gone through over the years and is still going, because that brand and that name is so synonymous and so special to a great many of us. And something that's been cool to see recently is, again, Fango expanding once again into full-fledged production and with Fangoria Studios, their first feature being announced, and keeping to that inclusion in the company's kind of missions. It will be a practical effects-driven creature feature, a Malaysian were-tiger film, no less. And I know that's a different division of Fango from your beat, but are there other avenues, for your earlier point, like Becky was asking about the expansion and the evolving? Is Fangoria looking to branch into something beyond print and digital and the production side?
All I know is what you know.
Fair enough.
So I wanted to transition to slash film and talk about that a little bit as well. I've really been enjoying, the continuation of the Scariest Scene Ever column that I think Meg Navarro started, I want to say.
Yes, she did.
She's amazing as well.
Incredible.
Yes, for sure. Given that slash film isn't hyper focused on the horror genre like Fangoria is, does your approach to content differ significantly for that platform? Does it impact how you write or how you edit?
It's a very interesting question. It both does and doesn't. That's one of the interesting things about kind of going back to a non-horror centric publication is like I have always been, a diehard fan of rom-coms. Like When Harry Met Sally is one of my absolute favorite movies. Another one of my absolute favorite movies is The Age of Innocence and the 1994 Little Women. But then I also love 13 Ghosts, and I also love Deep Blue Sea. So like, we come in all shapes and sizes with all different factors, and so much of us informs so much of our work. And that goes into editing as well. I've incidentally developed kind of, I guess, an expertise in horror. The idea of saying that I have an expertise in something just makes me want to kind of crawl into my own butthole and die. But because I'm like, oh no, it's too much of yourself, Ariel. But yes, the majority of my career has been more focused on horror. But the nice part about slash film is that I can put that knowledge and that expertise to use in regards to, looking at other people's work, where there are things that, I'm sure you guys can attest to this, where you're reading something by a website that doesn't necessarily focus on horror and they get their facts wrong, or they make a generalization that is incorrect and they just didn't quite double check their work enough. So it's like their point is slightly off base. And, I'm able to go in there and catch those things and help with those things. I can also help writers who aren't necessarily used to writing about horror. I can help guide them into different angles or vantage points that they wouldn't have necessarily thought of. And I can also lend, because I am writing while I'm editing. There are pieces that I take on and there are pieces that I have to add to and things like that. So that does come in handy. And at the same time, it's just really nice to get to write, like, for example, to get to write a quippy short news piece from the first look from the new Sex and the City reboot, which I love. Like, I love Sex and the City. The second movie can kind of take a long walk off a short pier. But other than that, I get to kind of flex my muscles in different areas now. And ultimately, writing is writing is writing is writing. You should be able to, any writer should be able to dip their toes into any genre. And particularly if it's news, you're expected to write about everything. Ideally from the most informed vantage point, and if not, with a little bit of research. So this definitely is a new and interesting way of flexing my muscles, so to speak.
Awesome. Wrapping up with the last question of the more formal section of the interview. Do you have any words of advice for those that are interested in writing or editing, for film or horror specifically? Like, thinking back about wee Ariel, like if you'd give her some advice, what would you say?
That's an interesting question. I always try. It's a very personal question anyway, so I'll just be a little personal because that's me and that's how I roll. One of the things that my therapist usually tries to do with me when I'm, having a hard time or I'm being too hard on myself is she tells me to think about my little one. So like that younger version of myself that's in me. And, where I'm beating myself up and I'm being too hard on myself and you should have done this and you should have done that and this, that, and the other, and you didn't do this well enough. What would I say to my little one, as she puts it? How would I talk to little Ariel? And I think that's kind of an important exercise for everybody to take, which is how would you talk to your younger self? Would you berate them and tell them that they're not good enough? Would you tell them that they're a failure and that they're not trying hard enough? And the answer is 9 times out of 10, probably no. And so what I tend to say, what I would say to my younger me, maybe not my little one, maybe not my child, but yeah, maybe a little bit. To little me, I'd probably say, don't be so afraid of yourself. Don't worry about what other people are going to think about the thoughts you have and the things you want to say. And that's not even directly related to writing, but that's where it starts. And that's where it begins. It starts from having confidence in yourself and a sense of security in who you are. And then, to high school me, don't be afraid to take on assignments that you think you're not good at. You're better at things than you think. Don't turn down the projects that seem too hard. Hard is good. To quote Jimmy Dugan, the hard is what makes it great. If it was easy, everybody would do it. And oh man, the things that I would tell university me and any writers or aspiring writers in that field. And I actually went back to McMaster a few years ago, and they asked me to come in and do a talk for current students looking to get into media and writing. And I said, just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of what you think is interesting and what you think needs to be said. Because if you only make things based on your assumptions of other people's wants and needs, then you're never going to do anything different. And we're just going to stay in the same cyclical problem that we're stuck in now, which is a lot of the same insular voices, just kind of an echo chamber back and forth. And we're starting to break out of that. And the best way to just keep going for me as a writer, for you as filmmakers, for other filmmakers out there, other writers, other editors, writers of fiction, nonfiction, documentarians, everybody, if you're creating, don't be afraid of the fact that what you want, that you haven't seen what you want to create, because you might be the person to do that. And then everything changes, but it has to start from somewhere.
I love that. It makes me think there was a woman that I worked with who was an engineer in, a very male dominated industry. But one of the things, we give each other little like pep talks before meetings if we were worried about something. And we'd always be like, be brave, don't be afraid. Mm-hmm. That was always the thing we said to each other. So, I think, and that's kind of universal advice to your point, whatever you're interested in. Likely film if you're listening to this podcast.
Yes.
But thank you, Ariel. It's great words of wisdom to share.
Yeah, good notes from her and the therapist. I like the idea of going back. No, I really do. I know it's easy to get caught up in all of it, but then you think what would 10-year-old you think of you? You don't think he'd be really proud that you've done what you've done? That's a good message just for some folks to go back to. I think when they get down in the dumps about their career or lack thereof,
yeah,
you're doing better than 10-year-old you ever thought you'd probably do.
Exactly. Would 10-year-old you think you're cool? If you saw 10-year-old you and they were sad and they felt like they hadn't done enough, would you yell at them or would you give them a hug and say everything's going to be okay? And if you'd give them a hug, why can't you give yourself a hug?
Exactly. Like
you said, Ariel, if 10-year-old you knew that you would be managing editor at Fangoria, I think she'd be like, whoa, I'm pretty awesome.
10-year-old you'd be like, what's Fangoria?
Yeah, she'd be very, very confused. She'd be like, I don't understand how you I need to know. And maybe it was the ADHD, but she'd look at me and go, okay, so you need to explain every detail that got you from right now to there, and then I'll be able to make sense of this.
Can you draw a map for me?
Exactly.
So we'll just skip over the fact that she casually quoted Jimmy Dugan from A League of Their Own, I believe, in the middle of all that.
Yep.
And talking about her confidence. Now we're going to make her question everything. This is usually the part where the most confident people start to lose faith in themselves. In the Rapid Fire 15, we gave her the skinny on what it is ahead of time, a bit like the Proust questionnaire, but we kind of tried to tailor it as the show went to her taste. So the questions are a bit of, she may have answered a couple already, in fact, including the first few here. So Becky, if you want to start us off, Ariel, no pressure, just first thing that comes to mind. There's no points. There's no, prize at the end. Just let the listeners.
Rules are made up and the points don't matter.
Exactly.
Yep.
Folks will just know a little bit more about you when this is all said and done.
And how quickly do I actually have to answer?
As quickly as you want to get out of here. Honestly, we don't. If you sat for a solid minute, I'd probably omit that from the show when I'm editing it. But no, just first thing that comes to mind. Like I said, no, don't think too hard on it.
Gotcha.
What movie do you think you have seen the most in your life?
Oh God. There's probably a couple. That's the problem. Can I answer with multiple?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Jaws, When Harry Met Sally, Young Frankenstein, Robin Hood Men in Tights, any of the Back to the Futures. Probably those.
I think this follow-up question you will have just mentioned in the past 20 seconds. What is your ultimate comfort movie? Your anytime, anywhere warm blanket that you can put on in any mood, any day?
Depending on the mood or the day, either When Harry Met Sally or Jaws. Yep.
What is your favorite Universal Monster or Universal Monster movie?
I'd probably have to say Frankenstein, the OG.
That is a good one. How about your favorite horror movie franchise?
Ooh, Scream.
Nice. You were right off the cusp on that one.
That one was like no.
What is your favorite horror movie subgenre?
I'd probably have to say aquatic horror, maybe.
Ooh, nobody said that yet.
Right?
Because I'm a sucker for like Deep Blue Sea, and now 47 meters down makes me want to die a little. And Crawl is incredible, and Jaws, and like So probably.
Who would you say is your all-time favorite final girl?
Oh, Gail Weathers.
Oh, I like that answer. I don't think nobody said that.
No.
Oh, I love it. All right. What is your all-time favorite romantic comedy that is not When Harry Met Sally?
No, fair. Romantic comedy that is not When Harry Met Sally. Ooh. And of course, now my brain is like, all I see is fuzz.
All it sees is When Harry Met Sally.
Yeah, it's all I see is you. Oh, there are so many, though.
There could be Sex in the City, which you mentioned earlier, too. It doesn't have to be a movie. No, that's not it. No, get out of here.
That's not it.
Who knew that would be the one that broke her?
Yeah, seriously, right?
I'm surprised. I thought it would be. Well, I think it's not fair to leave out your favorite one. Maybe that's the problem. Is to say, what's your favorite, but you can't tell me your actual favorite. So maybe it's my question.
No, it's a fair question. I'm just trying to think because I don't tend to think about it, right? So I might have to say something like The Princess Bride.
Interesting. No, only interesting because the follow-up question, you just named another movie by the same director. Do you have an all-time favorite director?
I had an all-time favorite director I have a very complicated relationship with. Unfortunately, Woody Allen was my favorite director for a very long time. Annie Hall was a very formative film for me, and so was The Purple Rose of Cairo, actually more so. And I like Hannah and Her Sisters. I also love. There's so many of his movies from that period. Not Manhattan. That one always weirded me out, even before things were discussed and known. So I have a very conflicted relationship with. Like I haven't watched any of his movies in years now, which is sad because I love those films, but I just can't quite take them separately. Unfortunately,
no, understood.
I don't mind saying all of this and just being like, yeah, no, I really love his movies. I also now have a hard time loving his movies because of him.
Yeah.
Yep. I feel that way about a lot of art in general. And I think it's always part of the conversation. And just the awareness around it is a good thing. And everybody's got to draw their own lines somewhere around it, right? Like some people are like, I will never watch a film by this filmmaker. Some people are like, well, I can appreciate the film and separate the art from the creator. And everyone's like, well, I don't want, some people are like, I don't want my money going towards that person. But if I have a Blu-ray that I bought a long time ago, I can still watch that. Everybody has their own framework for dealing and managing with kind of the ethical conundrum of it. But I think it's a good conversation to have, to your point.
Yeah. I mean, there's other directors that I really love. Mike Flanagan jumps to mind.
Yeah.
Rob Reiner's amazing. And now I'm trying to pull out of the ether of my foggy brain because my brain is an ether-filled foggy brain. I'm sure I could think of some others, but off the top of my head right now, I got nothing.
No, I think that was a solid answer. Who was your first celebrity crush?
Interesting. Honestly, I think it was probably Salma Hayek.
Ooh, from Dusk Till Dawn?
No, from Desperado.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to both.
There.
Yeah. And that was like, actually, it was both of them, if I'm being completely honest. It was both Antonio Banderas and Salma Hayek. Because like, I wanted to both be both of them and was attracted to both of them and was very confused as a child. And I didn't know what it was. But that would probably be the one to take the cake.
Good
and
answer.
Val Kilmer as Mad Mardigan, let's be honest.
Right. Becky, you weren't wrong to assume that because that was probably her most overtly sexual role. So, and from the same era. So. I love the Mad Mardigan answer, though. That's topic for another time. I love Willow. People shit on that movie so hard nowadays, and that was not always the case. People reassess it in a very unfair way, in my opinion, nowadays.
That is stupid. Willow is exceptional.
Agreed. Also exceptional, even though Becky does not agree, are the Muppets. Who would you say is your favorite Muppet and favorite Muppet movie?
Oh, I honestly don't know if I have a favorite Muppet movie. Because like I grew up with the oh no, actually that's a lie. Why do I always separate that one? Jesus. A Muppet Christmas Carol. That was like absolutely always my go-to for them. I love that movie. I've seen that movie so many times. Yeah, no, and yes, I am a Jew, but my parents always raised us with Christmas as well, because when my dad was growing up in Peterborough, Ontario, there weren't a lot of other Jews in his neighborhood, and their neighbors always invited him and his sister, my aunt, over with my Bubby and Zeta over for like Christmas Day, and they would give them presents, and then they'd get to do stuff like that because it was fun. Because Hanukkah is really not very fun. It's not the equivalent of it's not Jewish Christmas. It has its own significance, and like most other Jewish holidays, it's a little maudlin. But so that kind of rubbed off, and we got to do things like that. So movies like A Muppet Christmas Carol were like on rotation all the time. I remember watching it on pay-per-view when we had our grandparents' pay-per-view box, and I fucking loved it. If I had to pick a favorite Muppet, I'm so tempted to say Animal or The Swedish Chef.
I'm not a Muppet person,
no wrong answers there,
but I like those answers. They're like the crazy ones, right?
Yeah. And The Swedish Chef is hilarious. Like no matter what, he's always funny.
It very much is.
All right, we're taking a different route with the questions now. Let's say you are gonna cook up a big fancy pasta dinner. Ooh. What type of noodle are you gonna use? Like, what's the best noodle?
Bucatini.
See, I knew she would have an answer right off the top, and it wasn't going to be like spaghetti.
Nope. If I'm going to make a big, nice, like pasta dish, it's like for an occasion, but it's like a comfort food occasion. It's going to be bucatini alla matriciana, and it's going to have guanciale and everything in it, and it's going to be delicious. But bucatini, hands down.
I'm hungry now. Thanks.
That sounds good. Yeah, Becky's usually responsible for the food questions in these, and I'm like, I didn't question that one. I just knew she knew something about you. To ask you that one. Also, one of hers. What is your go-to cocktail?
My go-to cocktail, it tends to shift, but I want to say a gin martini, so a martini, because that's the way it should be. Slightly dirty.
No vodka.
Oh, no vodka. No, give me gin. Give me gin or give me death. I'd say either a dirty gin martini, stirred, not shaken, because I'm not James Bond and I'm not curious about getting poisoned, and or Ardbeg 10-year scotch.
Nice. Those are like fancy drinks. Yeah. Like you have one with your fancy pasta.
No, then you have to have wine. Come on.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Okay. It's the nightcap after the pasta.
Yeah, exactly. Can you tell I worked in the restaurant industry for too fucking long? Oh, my God.
All right. Who is your favorite Canadian band or musical performer?
Oh, whoa. No fair. Bam. Oh, God damn it. Oh, that's a tough one.
We usually ask any Canucks that have been on the show, like what their favorite maybe comedian, because there's a ton of those from Canada, or maybe who the most famous Canadian from their hometown is. But I was told you were a Jethro Tull fan, so I was like, maybe
I am a Jethro Tull fan.
Although they're Brits, but do you have?
But they're Brits, yeah.
Canadian.
Does the Commonwealth count? Can we just be like, oh, we're from the Commonwealth?
No, you've already got them on your money. We don't know.
Oh, Jethro! We have Jethro Tull on our money. That would be really nice.
No, the Commonwealth figureheads. That would be cool.
That would be super cool. It's a hard pick, man, because like Tragically Hip is incredible, and I also love Great Big Sea. And Alanis Morissette, circa Jagged Little Pill, is pristine. Holly McNarland is also incredible, and like, but then you've got like Bran Van 3000, and like,
holy cow, I've not heard that name in years.
But you've heard that name, and that
Drinking
matters.
in L.A. was a formidable song when I was in L.A.
I tried telling my husband about that because it came on. I was listening to a 90s playlist, a 90s Canadian playlist on Spotify, and that song came on, and I'm just like kind of bopping along in the car. And John looks at me like, okay, this is nice. And I'm like, wait a minute, have you never heard this before? He's like, no. I'm like, but I know this is Canadian, but I could have sworn this was like not just in like that people knew this. He had never heard it before in his life.
It was in the opening credits to a movie called Playing by Heart that had a big sprawling all-star cast back in the day. And that's how I think I learned of it first.
Yeah.
I'm going to listen later. I'm not sure if I know it or not. The name isn't familiar, but maybe if I heard it, it would be. It's
really good. And like, and Bare Naked Ladies and stuff. Like I'm also just a huge, I know I mentioned them already, huge Great Big Sea fan. I got to stop. I could keep going. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just, the fact that you mentioned both Bran Band and you started with Tragically Hip, you're cool in my book just for knowing both of them. Like I've heard a lot of people on the Tragically Hip in my life.
Excellent. You're doing Canada's work. Thank you.
When you do a few film shoots in New Orleans, you can't help but sing How It's Sinking.
Wow.
People go, what are you singing? I'm like, oh, nothing. It's the Tragically Hip. Here's a mix CD I already made for you here. Stashed up and ready to go. All right, we'll accept the 12 answers you gave us because you didn't say like Shania Twain and Bryan Adams or something.
Although I did have a crush on Bryan Adams when I was younger, but when I was really young and didn't know what reality was, so we're good.
All right, similar music question. What would be your walk-up music if you were coming to the stage for your TED Talk or if you were a fighter or a ball player? Like, what's the song you enter to that gets everybody hyped up for Ariel Fisher to speak or perform or beat somebody's ass?
Holy shit, that's a hard question.
I think we just pinpointed it a minute ago. It's Drinking in LA.
Did we? No, it is not Drinking in LA. But
while you're thinking of that, I should say Ariel was in my corner when I did the Fantastic Fest.
Yes, I was
boxing against Brad. Ariel was like my hype girl.
That's funny. You mentioned you guys were defending slashers, right? Did you both have entry music?
Yeah, we did. Weirdly, I did like the opening. I did Ave Satani from The Omen, just because I wanted something like dark and mysterious. Yeah, I don't remember what Brad's entrance music was.
You're wrong with Jerry Goldsmith.
No, you can't. You can't. It worked for the whole aesthetic because I had like a black robe over my head that I came out to.
She looked like a badass.
Thank you, Ariel. I was trying to give you some time to think of the answer here too for you.
Maybe Jeffrey told.
The problem is that I was focusing on what you were saying, and I'm like, wait, no, I know what she's doing, and I'm not using the time wisely.
Yeah, Jethro Tull would be an interesting thing to walk out to. I could see that.
But somehow not right. Like, that doesn't quite fit. I'm tempted to pick something from, like, the Birds of Prey soundtrack.
Ooh, yeah. Like a Boss Bitch or something.
No. I might say, just because I would actually have to, like, sit and think about this in order to pick the real one, but because this is what's coming to mind, I'm just going to go with this. Experiment on Me by Halsey.
Ah, nice. I like that. Soundtrack's awesome.
Or like Sugar by System of a Down, maybe. Who knows?
I love it. All right, last question, and then you'll be free from this pressure.
This pressure is fun.
Fun pressure, though, yeah. Your favorite movie theater gives you permission to host a double feature of any two movies in existence. What are you programming for your nearest and dearest that would give them the best sense of who Ariel Fisher is?
Oh my God. Why do you have the tough questions? Why wasn't I not allowed to prepare?
Because we like this whole suffering thing that people go through. It's great.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You're just mean.
So a double bill that will give people a bit more insight into me. That's the goal?
Yeah, or it just also, it doesn't have to be like this movie represents X part of me, but it can also just be like something that represents your taste or,
Right.
Yeah.
And only a double bill.
Sure. But if you want to make it a triple bill, you can.
Don't tempt me.
She's trying to find a way to put Age of Innocence in there. I can see her brain working. She's like, I got to put a rom-com in with my 13 Ghosts.
Hey, Age of Innocence is not a rom-com, sir.
No, I'm sorry. That and a rom-com and a horror is what I'm saying. You're trying to find a way to put one of the childhood favorites in.
Actually, that's not totally inaccurate. Okay, so I will say The Age of Innocence because that one is like the be all and end all for me. But I'm torn between the second feature being either 13 Ghosts or Deep Blue Sea. And either way, that's a weird double feature.
Becky, did you hear me predict both of those earlier?
Yes,
You
I
say
can.
13 Ghosts
Yes,
and Age of Innocence.
I'm very proud of you, Sean.
Wait, did you actually guess that I would say 13 Ghosts and Age of Innocence?
When you said you were going to add a third, I said she's trying to find a way to put Age of Innocence in there because I thought you were going to do Age of Innocence rom-com and a horror. But I jokingly, as an aside, said she's trying to find a way to put that in with a rom-com and 13 Ghosts.
Yeah. No, just those. Yeah, I'm predictable now.
No, you're not. You just, it was based on everything you've said in this rapid fire segment.
You have a strong brand and you communicated your interests very well.
And that brand is chaos.
I love it though. That's you, right? That's you. So that would be a wild double feature. I'll buy a ticket.
Sweet. We'll do the Age of Innocence first. That way, if anybody wants to bail afterwards, they are more than welcome to. Half the theater clears out.
They'll miss LL Cool J and Deepest Bluest. Becky's favorite closing credits song.
Oh, I love it.
It's so good.
Oh man, my friends and I were kids running around singing "My Head Is Like a Shark's Fin." So great.
Oh man, we'll wrap up the rapid fire 15 there, and you gave us some fun answers, a few all-timers in there. We appreciate it. So no more pressure on that. Before we let you run, just a couple quick things. Is there any project coming up for you that you can maybe talk about or even vaguely talk about? Anything on the horizon for you?
Well, as is my moral and professional obligation, if you haven't yet, you should definitely subscribe to Fangoria magazine. The subscribers cover for the upcoming issue is all Halloween kills all the time, and it is absolutely gorgeous, designed by Jason Kozlarich. And if you want to get that cover, you've got to subscribe soon because the window's closing. I can't remember exactly when, but I'm sure these two fine folks will put some kind of date under there, so in their description, so that you'll have something more than my vagueness to go on. Other than that, I would also like to shout out the mental health and horror documentary being made by my husband, Jonathan Barkan, and in co-production with Andrew Hawkins and David Lawson Jr., who is part of Rustic Pictures. They are putting together this incredible documentary, and it should be amazing. They're hoping to have it out next year. They're currently shooting some stuff in LA right now as I speak. And keep your eyes peeled to their various social medias for any updates and more crowdfunding that's coming up so that they can make the money they need to shoot the film that they want to shoot and interview all the people that they'd like to include.
Awesome. And speaking of following social media and stuff, where can people find you online? Where would you like to direct them if they want more fun tidbits from Ariel and to, hear more about, Fangoria and /film and all of that?
More of my insanity can be found on pretty much all social media at AFIS8, AFIS8. I have a website, it's arielfisher.com, but it is currently under construction because I have no time. But it's getting there slowly but surely. Socials are the best place to find me. I'm also on TikTok at AFIS, AFIS, #8, because AFIS 8 was taken.
Who did that?
I don't know, but I'm mad about it.
Yeah. But nobody's personal website is ever up to date. I'm just going to put that out there.
It's actually just not up right now, let alone up to date. It's just like down.
We've alerted a guest that their website is down or very out of date a few times now on the show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, don't feel bad if it's slightly out of date.
It's kind of a normal thing.
I have a link tree that's more useful right now. So
awesome. And we can link to the link tree.
Yes.
All right. Once again, thank you so much, Ariel, for joining us. I had a blast. It's just fun. It just feels like we're chatting like at a bar or something. Maybe with some gin martinis, not vodka.
And not shaken.
Not
shaken. Not shaken.
Only stirred.
Well, hopefully we'll all be able to do that again sooner than later. I know there's some in-person festivals coming in the fall here, so maybe we can buy her that martini in person.
My fingers are crossed that we can do so safely.
Yes.
Agreed.
No, we thank you very much for the time. I know it was we're threading a needle here with everybody to get it done. So we do appreciate you making the time for us. And thank you for the answers and the insight into editing and Fangoria and everything else you're up to right now. We're excited to see what else you have coming down the pike here.
Thank you very much. And thank you both so much for including me. This was an absolute, I really love doing this. Thank you.
Awesome.
No, it was our pleasure for sure.
All right. Thanks, Ariel. Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Thank you.
Take care.